We got a doozy for you today, guys. A new case that just hit the news out of Memphis because there's a lawsuit that's getting ready to be filed. And you're not going to believe this, but even after Tyre Nichols, the Memphis police still think it's okay to beat people simply because they think people need a beating. Let's talk about it. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Southern Draw Law. My name is James White, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former police officer. July of 2024, there's a gentleman named Mario Shaw. He has a dispute, sort of an ongoing dispute with his neighbor, something to do with one or the other of their dogs using the bathroom on his yard. So at some point, neighbor calls the police and says that Mario Shaw, who is our victim in this particular case, is drunk and waving a gun around, and that they got into a dispute. So Memphis PD comes out and they're talking to the neighbor that called the police, and that's where our story picks up. So the news story comes to us from ABC 24 out of Memphis, and we will just watch this and let them explain to you what the backstory is and where we are now. And then we're going to come back and break down some of the body cam footage and talk about some of the legal aspects of this and some of the nuanced areas of Tennessee law that we don't really get an opportunity to talk about very often. Let's check it out.
A Fraser man says his life changed in seconds, and it was all caught on camera. Mario Shaw says he was beaten, bitten, hit several times, and tased in his own front yard. He says a call from his neighbor brought 2 police officers to his home, and now the homeowner plans to sue the police department. ABC 24's Yvonne Cooper shows us what unfolded next and what prompted an internal investigation. It's a story you will only see on ABC 24 News.
The video that we're about to show you is graphic, but Mario Shaw wants you to see it. He told me that he did not have a gun and he didn't threaten the officers. Now he's demanding justice and accountability.
Get out my yard. Identify yourself, please.
I'm on the phone. I'm standing on my front porch requesting for a supervisor to come. That's when I got attacked.
This Ring doorbell footage shows a Memphis police officer run toward this man, grab him, and throw him off of his own porch.
Get out on the ground.
That man is Mario Shaw.
I was treated like an animal in my front porch. It's overwhelming for me.
14 seconds into this video, Shaw is seen struggling with the officer. Another officer runs up and pulls his taser, while the first officer punches Shaw in the back of the head at least 5 times. The video shows the second officer kick Shaw in the back. Then Shaw says one officer bit him.
He took one bite, then he went in for a second bite, and that's when I felt it then. I yelled out.
Everybody fire me, yo!
Shaw was treated for his injuries at Regional 1. In July 2024, he was then cuffed and booked on 4 charges, including assault on a first responder.
I stayed in jail, I think, about maybe a week, or a little bit over a week, and it was hard for me. I felt that the system had let me down.
But months later, in December, Judge Christian R. Johnson dismissed all charges against Shaw.
He dismissed it because the affidavit stated that I assaulted the officer. And once he saw the video, he noticed that all of it was made up.
Moments before officers arrived at his home, Shaw said that he had an argument with a neighbor whose dog ran onto his yard. One police report states that the 2 men had disagreements in the past because of their dogs, but this time, the neighbor called police. According to the affidavit and a police report, officers Tywan Brooks and Kevin Shannon came to Shaw's home. The documents state that the officers believe Shaw was possibly armed, meaning they thought he might have a gun, based on a statement that was made from a neighbor. Shaw said that he didn't, and there isn't a gun visible in this video. This footage only shows Shaw holding a phone to his ear. And the police report never mentions that the officers found a gun. The documents state the suspect pulled away from officers when they tried to handcuff him. Then, The suspect started to swing his fist at Officer Brooks, striking him in the face.
Get out of my yard.
But it doesn't play out that way in this video. You can see the officer at a distance. Shaw is standing on his front porch. Seconds later, the video shows that officer running towards Shaw before the incident. There are several things not listed in the incident report that you could clearly see happened on video. First, the incident report never mentions that Mario Shaw was kicked, that he was hit in the head multiple times, or that he had several injuries. Memphis Police chose not to speak to me on camera, but a spokesperson did answer a few of my questions by email. The statement reads in part, both officers completed the necessary use of force documentation following the event. The officers employed hard hand techniques and less lethal methods to safely take the suspect into custody. We filed an open records request to get a copy of those documents, but that request was denied. Also, the department would not confirm or deny that an officer bit Shaw.
Come on, get out. Get out on the ground.
Nearly 1 year after the incident, Shaw plans to sue the Memphis Police Department.
It didn't destroy my trust with Memphis Police Department.
He's also advocating for police reform in hopes of preventing another incident like this for him or anyone else.
Don't say you.
Thank God that my voice is finally getting heard, but I would like justice from the mistreatment that I received. Shouldn't nobody have to go through what I experienced.
The Memphis Police Department is standing by those officers, meaning that they are still on the streets and on patrol. In a statement, after reviewing the incident at the precinct level, it was determined that no disciplinary action was warranted. However, Mr. Shaw placed a telephone complaint with ISB, and the investigation into his allegations is ongoing. I have asked to see the body cam footage showing the arrest, but because Mario Shaw's complaint is still under review, the police department will not release those videos. Back to you.
Now, there was a short clip during the news report there that showed the actual document that was the police report. I took a screenshot of that and I was able to transcribe basically what the police said happened. Their story is that they made the scene to an armed party where the complainant advised that his neighbor, the suspect, Mario Shaw, had been drunk and waving a gun and causing a disturbance. And they put the report number here. Now, I don't have the actual report. I'm just going off of the ABC 24 story. Officer Brooks and Officer Shannon advised as Officer Brooks had been speaking with the complainant when the suspect Mario Shaw came outside yelling and causing a disturbance. That's when Officer Brooks made initial contact to detain the suspect Mario Shaw due to him being possibly armed with a firearm, but the suspect Mario Shaw pulled away from Officer Brooks when the officer grabbed his arm to place handcuffs on. The suspect started to physically swing his fist at Officer Brooks, striking him in the face. Officer Shannon then ran up to the suspect, Mario Shaw, and Officer Shannon notified Officer Brooks of his taser being deployed and shot 2 taser prongs into the suspect, Mario Shaw, which was ineffective. The suspect struck both Officer Shannon and Brooks. The suspect, Mario Shaw, started to then swing at both officers and also knocked their glasses off. Officer Brooks and Shannon advised dispatch. Officer Brooks advised other officers expedited to the scene while they created a large crowd of neighbors. Other officers were able to help detain the suspect, Mario Shaw, and he smelled of alcohol. So they ultimately charged Shaw with assault on a first responder and resisting. Now, resisting has a really different way of being applied in the state of Tennessee than other states, like for Florida, for instance. Under the Tennessee resisting statute, you have to use force, whereas under the Florida resisting without violence statute, if an officer says, hey, get out of the car and you don't do it, that's resisting without violence in Florida. In Tennessee, if an officer tells you to get out of the car and you don't do it, they may be able to justify dragging you out of the car, but you have not committed a criminal offense where you just sit there limp and don't comply. You have to actually use force under Tennessee law and under substantiated case law in order to be guilty of the offense of resisting a stop, halt, frisk, or detention, or whatever they call it. Okay, so they charge them with those 2 things and a couple more things, but those are the 2 important ones. Keep in mind, Tennessee is a back the blue state. In fact, they passed in 2025 a Back the Blue Act, and that levied the penalties for assault on a first responder as follows. And this is insane because even spitting on a police officer, don't get me wrong, guys, I don't think it's okay to spit on people, anybody. I don't care who it is. I don't think it's okay to assault people, any of that. But this is a circumstance where this may actually be a justified use of force against the police here, and I'm going to walk through why that is. But just keep in mind that if you are to spit on a police officer in 2025 in the state of Tennessee, these are the things that you'll have to be dealing with from a criminal perspective. It's a Class E felony when the victim is a law enforcement officer. It carries a $10,000 fine and at least 60 days in jail and no early release. So ordinarily you can get, say, if you take a 60-day sentence, you can get 75% for good time. It's 60 days at 100% for assault on a first responder. Now, that wasn't the law in 2024, which is when this happened. Now, there was an assault on first responder on the books at that time, and it was the sort of preamble to what we now know as the Back the Blue Act, which I still just hate saying out loud. But anyway, it was a $5,000 fine. It was a Class A misdemeanor. And in 2024, that's when they added spitting and a couple other things to the statute and made it to where it was served at 100% with a minimum of 30 days. Here's the thing about Tennessee law that is different than other places, other than that you have to use force in order to be guilty of resisting. If you look at the resisting statute, and I'm going to pull it up here, it's 39-16-602. It is an offense for a person to intentionally prevent or obstruct anyone known to be the person to be a law enforcement officer or anyone acting law, basically a police officer, okay, from affecting a stop, frisk, halt, arrest, or search, including the defendant, by using force against the law enforcement officer, okay? Very important. Now, subsection B is what matters. Except as provided in 39-11-611, it is no defense to prosecution under this section that the stop, frisk, halt, arrest, or search was unlawful. So what they're saying is that it's not enough. It doesn't give you the right to resist arrest simply because the arrest is unlawful. And I'll give you a glimpse. We're going to break it down more in detail in a little bit. But under the 39-11-611 statute, that is actually a self-defense justification under Tennessee law. And basically what it says is that you have the right to use a reasonable amount of force to prevent the police from using excessive force in arresting you. So it doesn't even matter that the arrest is unlawful or lawful. If the police are trying to use excessive force to arrest or seize you, you have the right under Tennessee law in a very narrow set of circumstances where you can actually use a reasonable amount of force to prevent excessive force in the process of being arrested. And I think this is maybe the one case that I think spells out a perfect defense under 39-11-611. And I've been practicing law in Tennessee for a long time, and this is maybe the only set of circumstances I've ever seen where I thought this might prevail. And if you remember, the charges were dismissed by this judge, and I believe they were dismissed, if I had to guess, because of this particular statute. So let's look at 39-11-611. Under subsection E, it says the threat or use of force against another is not justified. And then it goes down through here. Under E3, it says to resist a halt at a roadblock, arrest, search, or stop and frisk that the person using force knows is being made by a law enforcement officer. So in other words, you cannot use force against a law enforcement officer who's trying to arrest you or stop you unless, and this is where the exceptions come in. This would be 39-11-611, little e, 3, big A. The law enforcement officer uses or attempts to use greater force than necessary to make an arrest, search, stop, and frisk or halt, and it's a conjunctive test, so B has to be true also, and the person using the force, that is Mr. Shaw in this case, reasonably believes that the force is immediately necessary to protect against the law enforcement officer's use or attempted use of greater force than necessary. So this is maybe the perfect storm of circumstances. You have a police officer who is trying to arrest Mr. Shaw. And I'll explain as we go further on in the analysis and we break down the body cam why this subsection probably plays in. So now what I want to do is I want to bring back part of the news story that shows the body cam, and I want to walk through what's actually happening here, what the officers would have needed in order to make this legal, and why it is ultimately a violation of Mr. Shaw's constitutional rights. If we look at the body cam here, what we know from before is that Officer Brooks is talking to the other gentleman, right? He notices that Mario Shaw comes out on his porch. Now, here's where the case could potentially strengthen for the state. Notice that Mario Shaw is standing on his porch. He has a cell phone in his right hand, which is up towards his ear, and then he's got his left hand forward for whatever reason. That is how I would refer to it, as a tactically bladed stance. And if you're articulate as a police officer, you could say that from where Officer Brooks is standing, which looks to me to be maybe 30, 40 feet away, with the porch light shining in his eye and the stance that Mr. Shaw has taken, you got to remember that when the courts look at the officer's conduct in a civil suit, they look through the lens of an objectively reasonable police officer. An objectively reasonable police officer standing where Officer Brooks was would be able to articulate that based on his stance, it could be perceived that Shaw is standing in the same manner that you would stand if you were actually holding a weapon. Now, don't crucify me yet, okay? Hear me out, please. An objectively reasonable police officer, based on that, based on the light shining in their eye, based on his bladed stance, and based on him basically having the same posture as a person would have if they were shouldering a rifle. An objectively reasonable police officer would have taken cover, probably drawn either a firearm or a taser, and started giving verbal commands to Mr. Shaw. Because keep in mind, the call came out as, my neighbor is drunk and waving a gun around, okay? So they're talking to the neighbor. This guy comes out. This is the way he stands. You could make an argument that the court would accept. Again, this is not my personal opinion. This is what I believe would be acceptable by court. You could make an argument as an objectively reasonable police officer that the court would accept that he's standing in a way that it would be reasonable to believe he was holding a gun. Okay. But the officer's actions have to be consistent with what they say they were doing. Okay. So let's watch and see what they actually do in response to that. So notice that the officer is approaching sort of at a leisurely pace. And then all of a sudden he rushes, he sprints towards Mr. Shaw. No police officer observing officer safety would ever rush towards a person they thought was armed. So if you kick yourself back to the police report where he said he was possibly armed, no police officer would have done that if they believed that he was armed, which is why I said don't crucify me yet, because we have to compare what the objectively reasonable police officer would do versus what these guys did, right? So he rushes him. Now, one thing that matters, and I think we'll play in, is watch as we go back to where the officer is leisurely walking up. You'll notice that Shaw takes a step back and looks like he's turning to go back into the house. Okay, that matters. So let's break this down on how this actually should work if it was reasonable. What are the reasons you can detain somebody? Well, under Terry versus Ohio, you got reasonable articulable suspicion that a criminal activity is afoot, right? Mr. Shaw is standing on his porch, which is within the curtilage of the home. And we know that Terry applies in public. And we also know, which the civil rights lawyer talks about all the time, under Collins versus Virginia, the court said even probable cause is not enough to justify a warrantless entry into the curtilage of someone's home. You have to have a warrant. There's only basically one other way that you could make an articulable argument that it would be justified to run up and grab him the way they did. And that's basically exigent circumstances. So in order to justify exigent circumstances, they would have had to say that he was retreating into the house to get a gun. But for exigency to be justifiable, they would also need, one, a clear articulable belief that Shaw posed an imminent threat, which we have no reason to believe that because, again, he's just got a camera. And they can surely tell as he turns to go inside that he doesn't have a gun because you have to pick one. You either think he has a gun because of the way he's standing, which their conduct sort of preponderates against, or you think he was going to get a gun, but you have no reason to believe that that's what's going on other than, this information that you've got from a biased source from a guy who hates him next door. But the most important thing is that the conduct of the police officers has to be consistent with the fear that they've articulated. You'll notice that the police officer does rush and he does slow down at the end. And as the police officer slows down as he approaches the porch, Shaw turns back and faces him. And here's where the state's case implodes because The police officer didn't give him any commands in rushing up there. He didn't draw the gun. He didn't act like a police officer would act if he thought you were going inside to get a gun. He didn't say you're detained. He didn't say you're under arrest. No, he rushes up. He grabs Shaw's arms to hold him down. Then he switches his grips and he grabs him by the shirt. And he basically treats him like a schoolyard bully would. And he doesn't say you're under arrest. He doesn't say, look, let's just chill out. He says, what are you going to do about it? Because remember that Shaw had asked for a supervisor and was telling this guy to leave his property. So the police officer runs up. He doesn't do anything consistent with a police officer that is in fear for his safety or thinks there's a weapon involved. He grabs the guy and starts treating him like you would a sixth grade bully fight on the schoolyard and says, what are you going to do about it? And they begin a tussle, right? So that's where 611 comes in, because after this happens, it is reasonable for Shaw to believe that this guy has no intention of arresting him lawfully. He is very clearly trying to bully him and trying to give him a beatdown because he's there. He's not acting like a police officer. Everything about this particular situation looks to anyone who's ever been in a fist fight like it's a fist fight. It does not look like a police officer trying to conduct himself lawfully and position himself to do a detention. And that's why, in my opinion, 611 kicks in here and justifies the conduct of Mr. Shaw. And so we see some back and forth. We see Mr. Shaw throwing his hands out. And then we see ultimately Officer Brooks drag him off the porch, try to throw him. And then we see Shaw get some footing and reverse that throw, ultimately throwing the officer. And then that's when the rest of it comes in. But again, now you've got punches in the head multiple times. You've got a taser that's ineffective. And sort of the one that really, the straw that breaks the camel's back is 2 bites. And officer safety tenets dictate that you reduce skin-to-skin contact, you wear gloves, you take universal precautions when you're dealing with people. That's why these guys say anything in your pockets or poke, stick me, whatever. The real reason is because they want you to admit you have something illegal. But that's the idea that justifies the question, right? Nothing about this was consistent with what a police officer concerned about anyone's safety would have done. And that's why under the Graham factors, all of this points to unreasonableness. So that's probably why these charges were ultimately dismissed. And then that is, sort of the cake, but the icing on top of the cake is this bullshit narrative that they came up with after the fact that laid all these things out. Well, I'm going to go and detain him because he's possibly armed. Well, you can't detain somebody. First of all, being possibly armed in the curtilage of your home is not illegal. So you can't detain somebody without a crime. And we now know that you can't detain somebody on their porch or within the curtilage. So that's not true. It's just flat out a lie, which is very likely why, because the story did not match the video, why this judge dismissed all these charges. Just think about this. How hard do you think it is to get a circuit judge or a general sessions judge in Tennessee to dismiss a case where the police had to fight this guy right after they just passed this, enhanced first responder statute? Because the 2024 one was, again, a preamble to what we have now, but it was still stiffer than what it was before. The way that they acted is completely inconsistent with what you would do if you were doing what they said they were doing in the report. So it's very clearly a false report, which is actually a C felony under Tennessee law. Shaw is not allowed to resist arrest unless he's using 611 because his force that he reapplied to Officer Brooks was immediately necessary to keep Brooks from basically beating him up. In closing, when I first saw this, I thought, man, they didn't learn anything from Tyre Nichols. But it's actually worse than that. Because when I first saw it, because it just came out a couple days ago, I thought it's brand new. But it's actually only being reported by ABC 24 exclusively because he's announced that he's going to file a lawsuit. And the charges are recently dismissed. So that caused me to think, my God, this happened in 2024. Tyre Nichols died in January of 2023. So that means that after the protests, after the press conferences, after the reform, and most importantly, after all the dust settled, 18 months later, these guys had seen 4 of their colleagues indicted on a state level and a federal level for murder. And 18 months later, they rush a guy standing on his porch and give him a beatdown like you would see in the streets. They bite him. This is an animalistic. There's no holds barred here. This is not there's nothing but rage that causes a person to bite another person. It's not like this guy was on top of Officer Brooks putting his thumb in his eye. That might justify a biting if that's the only tool you have. No, he bit him from the outside over top his shoulder twice. You only do that when you're so enraged and out of control that that's just what you do. This is something they did 18 months after Tyre Nichols had been murdered and while their colleagues were subject to indictment for that murder. And so that should tell you one thing, which is that the Memphis Police believes that this is the way that the people in Memphis deserve to be policed. They believe that according to their subjective view of the world, if your conduct rises to the level where they think they need to give you a beatdown to teach you a lesson, they are willing to do it, even if it causes you to lose your life, even if they have to bite you, even if they have to beat you, tase you, whatever, and then they'll make up whatever lies they have to in order to justify their actions. And that is Memphis. Regardless of whether they disbanded the Scorpion unit, regardless, this was before they knew that the people of Tennessee were going to let them off. They still believe that this is the way that you should do things in Memphis. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I thought it was a really good opportunity to talk about that area of the law that allows the use of force to offset an otherwise unreasonable and excessive arrest, and to kind of break down sort of the nuance of this body cam and talk our way through it. So hope you got something from it. As the comments come in, I'll probably write a companion blog and I'll put it over on Substack. I invite you to head over to Substack and check it out. It's absolutely free to join. You can join on a paid tier if you want, but you don't have to. That's only for people who want to support the channel monetarily. I never put anything on Substack that people have to pay for. If you don't want to go to Substack, but you would like to support monetarily, I'll put my Venmo and PayPal links both here on the screen as well as in the description. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment on the video. Check out some of the other videos on the channel and leave a comment on there as well. Until I see you again, take care. Always film your interactions with the police and keep your evidence to yourself.